So on that note, and I'm sure we'll revisit a lot of these topics in later shows, I want to bring Felix in to get to the other huge pillar of Bush's legacy. Hi, Felix.
Hey, Felix. So as I think most of the viewers know, Felix Biederman is a co-host of Chapo Trap House. Welcome, Felix, to the Jacobin Show.
Hey.
So before you came on, we were kind of going over Bush's, laundry list of domestic policy hits. And we also talked a little bit about how Ariella and I were teenagers during the Bush years. And I think you were too, right?
I was 10 when he got elected.
Okay.
And let me
ask you this. Were you a teen anti-war protester? And follow-up question, did you own volumes 1 and 2 of Rock Against Bush?
So I did not go to an anti-war protest. I was very much against the war. I mostly like participated in online arguments about it as opposed to the physical ones. I wasn't into Rock Against Bush. I didn't really like that type of music. I did get excited when someone I liked, like Jadakiss, would say that Bush did 9/11, even though I didn't really agree with that at the time. One of my most profound cultural memories from the time, besides just walking by and seeing my dad laughing to the point of tears at Mind of Mencia, was it was going to see Fahrenheit 9/11 with my mom.
Oh yeah, I did that.
After school, and both of us being like, wow,
can you believe it?
He's gonna lose. Everyone's gonna see this. He's done.
So, okay, on the subject of online arguments, I would like you to make an online argument now. Why did the US invade Iraq? I know that sounds massively stupid, but if you think back to 2003, obviously the weapons of mass destruction, which was the Bush administration's rationale for war, nowhere to be found. Even at the time, opponents of war were saying, well, where are the weapons of mass destruction? Send in inspectors, check with the UN, please, literally do anything except just immediately go to war. I don't know if you guys remember this, but Condoleezza Rice famously said at the time, we can't let the smoking gun be a mushroom cloud. So, there was no mushroom cloud. But I remember at the time, the left, the big thing was that the war was over oil, right? Or some people talked about the Halliburton contracts. Dick Cheney had to Halliburton, and the profit motive was basically going to start the war and send the troops in so that Dick Cheney and other cronies could get richer. And then fast forward to 2013, 10 years after the war has started, troops are still in Iraq, and I remember kind of doing some research, hey, why did we actually go to war in Iraq? And I kind of think that the answer is still just a collective shrug. For me personally, I think I still believe in kind of the profit argument. And also I think that there's an argument to be made that, it was sort of this neo-imperial chess move where the Bush administration wanted to establish a strategic stronghold in that region. But of course, they completely destabilized the region and led to the creation of ISIS. So Felix, top 3 reasons for invading Iraq.
I think everyone had different reasons. I think if you were a military contractor, yeah, you're obviously going to want more places that are invaded that no one's really looking after, that you can steal billions of dollars in just cash pallets from, that you can charge, $75 for a can of Sprite remix. Those guys are always going to want more war. They'll always want more permanent bases being built. There's the part of the security state that is it's like a virus. It only knows how to perpetuate itself. So if there's this place on Earth that we have to occupy forever, that's forever going to be in a civil war of varying intensities, yeah, of course they would want that. But I think, why did everyone go along with it? I think it's because Afghanistan wasn't very satisfying to us. We the idea of fighting an actual army and not just you know, I'm remembering one of my favorite jokes of the Bush era, probably the best joke about the Iraq War, Cat Williams' insurgent joke.
Tell it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to.
You
I don't want to butcher it, but he basically says, you know, we're losing to a bunch of guys in sandals. But
Yeah.
you know, that was. I remember like Saturday Night Live and shit trying to like recreate the feeling of World War II with Afghanistan, and you just can't do that.
Mhm.
It's. I mean, there's just no satisfying like full military victory you can get over there. It's not Germany, you know. Donetsk is going to go over and sign a paper, and then you're done, and then you rebuild, and everyone gets along now. It's going to be a war forever, and I think we knew that. And I think the idea of just like A-10 warthogs vaporizing Iraqi Republican Guard and tanks rolling through Iraqi cities and just an unquestionable military victory was too attractive to people. I mean, I think like you can go back and look at like the Team B people, like Paul Wolfowitz, and it's like, yeah, maybe they, you know, for them, it's that Straussian view of the world where it's like we have to fight a war forever, so we don't grow soft and decadent, which, you know, will happen anyway. But I would have to say it's profit, and it was just like an easy. You know, we needed some place we could run over and look satisfying to people.
I think there's been a pretty remarkable shift too, because at least where I grew up, and I think we saw this on a lot of conservative media, they're talking about like the role of the US globally is to spread freedom and democracy and so on and so forth. And Saddam Hussein's mission in life as a governing actor was to ruin those things. It doesn't have to be in any specific way either. I remember seeing the footage of, you know, statues of him being pulled down, or when he was captured, playing over and over and over again. And then as the narrative soured for liberals or for Democrats, I think you started to see this fissure that we still have today, where Fox News became like the Freedom Patriot Network, telling the truth about America's role as the police of the world. And, you know, the Democrats started digging into and questioning more of that. And you saw more of that in their media. And I wanted to see if you have any thoughts about like the enduring legacy of that fissure in the media.
Yeah, I think that is around the time. I mean, the Bush years in general, there was a lot of that fissure around domestic policy and other things, but the Iraq War really put it front and center because Fox News was the most successful at turning it into a culture war issue, where you were like a gay pussy if you didn't want to be at war forever. And
I remember that segment. Was that like Tucker Carlson or something?
Yeah.
With the bow tie?
Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, that's the frustrating thing about it, though, is, yeah, Fox was awful during that time and is now, and bears a huge amount of the responsibility for selling the war to the American public, but so does fucking CNN. So does MSNBC.
Yeah, I was going to say,
so
I
does
mean,
the New York
like,
Times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like there was a lot that was actually very bipartisan, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
like the New York Times in particular, I think it still kind of shocks me, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you read it, just blanket support. But I think they started to realize when Fox like drew a line on that terrain and people started to question Bush's policies, that they had to, you know, appear less supportive than when they started. Same with politicians. I mean, you watch Hillary Clinton do this in her campaign, and every other person who supported it that's a Democrat.
Or unfortunately, like, yeah, Ed Markey. I mean, like, this is the real thing about the Iraq War that's painful for people to talk about. Very few people who were in power at that time walk away looking good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Even people that we like in comparison to others.
Mhm.
And the depressing second part is that they're all still in power, you know?
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it's hard to think of anyone who their life was made worse by being wrong on this.
Right.
I mean,
except the people who served. I grew up with a lot of people who really supported it and who did believe in the vision of America as being this kind of global enforcer of freedom. They believed in a kind of American system of democracy that created the basis for a good life for a working person.
Right.
And some of that was borne out by like real actual things like American industry existing at the time. A lot of people where I grew up worked in the naval yard or worked building ships, worked in some way adjacent to the military, but they came back ravaged by those wars. And I think you saw that with a lot of Trump supporters as well. He ran on ending the wars. I was wondering if you could expand on that sort of split, I guess, from the normal Republican stance that Trump took.
That was very interesting to me as someone who is, alive during that time. And, I would definitely call myself like during the Bush years, I was a very like online, like lived up kid. I had lived parents who hated the CIA. So that was the difference between me and a lot of people.
Now people love it. So
yeah, they're back in.
Yeah, no. Well, that was. I mean, I miss the Bush era libs. There were some cool libs during that time because, like, the boomer libs were so interesting because they had the correct suspicions a lot of the time. Like, they hated the CIA, they distrusted the national security state, all these things, but they didn't know what to do about it. Like, my dad voted for Angela Davis than Bill Clinton.
All right.
Like, he doesn't have like a
two black candidates.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And no, but I mean, this is a digression, but I was just thinking about, do you remember when Peter Fonda, he like 2 weeks before he died was like, what if somebody fucking molested Barron in an ice camp? And it was like, whoa, what the fuck? But it was also like, oh, that's what libs used to be like.
Right.
Yeah. But
I mean, I too think a lot about like the opposition art of the Bush era because, like, on one hand, I mean, like a while ago, I was like, oh, like the opposition art like clearly sucked. Like, Ariella and I, we were teenagers at the time, so like part of it, I think, was like reflecting on your teenage years and being a little bit embarrassed. But I was recently at my parents' house and I found an old copy of Get Your War On, which is a comic from that time period.
I remember that. Yeah,
it's really funny, actually. Like, yeah, we have a slide up now. It's like these office clip art guys who are like, yeah, the war on terror fucking rips. And again, there was no solution. It was actually pretty nihilistic, but at the same time, it wasn't as sanctimonious, I don't think, as the opposition art is now.
No, yeah. But just going back to the original question, that sorry, I just had a digress. I was thinking a lot about Bush era.
I was going to ask you about Peter Fonda, actually. So I'm glad you got to the chase there. End of interview.
But so when I watched Trump, like from mid 2015 on, when I moved to New York, that was the first Trump supporter I ever met, was in June of 2015. It was the awful woman whose living room I subletted, who was like, just out of nowhere would be like, there are too many people from Syria coming. Like she would like talk about, a bunch of people dying.
That was her one issue, the Syrian refugees.
Yeah. She would talk about something awful happening in Syria, and then she'd be like, and you know what? They're all coming here to kill us. And I'd be like, oh, okay, lady. What the fuck? Okay. But she was like the perfect Trump supporter because she was like a sort of ethnic white person in Queens who feels like her lot in life has decreased since the 70s and 80s. And like no coherent foreign policy vision except for like what this guy says. And Trump's opposite, or not really opposition. I mean, like he was for it at the time, but like his retroactive opposition to it, it was notable to me because I thought that it reminded me of another thing he did when he shit on John McCain, because it was one of those things where I thought the support was very hollow, where John McCain might have pulled really high with people, but it's like, do people really know or like give a shit who he is enough to affect their actions if the choice is put in front of them? Just like the Iraq War. Like the Iraq War, it suffered a pulling hit in the last 2 years of Bush when no one liked him, but it was still broadly more popular with Republican polling bases than Democratic ones. And you would never think like a guy could just attack the Iraq War, attack the Bush family, like attack everyone based on this. And he did, because the support for it was hollow. No one actually thought about it. And again, if you're doing it by culture war metrics, where it's like, oh yeah, no, I'm for it because the people who are against it are like annoying pussies. And if a guy's whose entire thing is like, I care about people's feelings less than anyone, like does this upset you? Good, I'm gonna say it. If he's against it, then it's like, okay, I don't have to support this anymore.
Yeah, I want to go back to the culture war stuff for a minute, because I'm reminded that the Republicans are still insane, but back then they were super bad. Like, do you guys remember David Frum, Bush's speechwriter, coming up with the phrase "axis of evil," which is hilarious, and Bush like subsequently used it all the time. The congressional Republicans. Do you guys remember the like French foreign affairs minister or whatever was like, maybe you guys should not go to war? And the congressional Republicans were so outraged that they were like, we're changing French fries on the congressional menu to freedom fries. Like, that shit is insane.
Yeah. No, yeah, there was an insane fervor in the country. I mean, the Dixie Chicks were the most hated Americans for a while. I mean, that was, I guess, like, I don't really want to make it a referendum on cancel culture, but I guess that's like why I'm broadly against like just the idea of that as being a piece of political utility now, is because I remember when it was the other way.
Right.
I remember when it was the other way, where you would get canceled for, being against the war, or like, being for gay marriage. And it's like, I don't know. It's just why I think culture war stuff is politically short-sighted.
Yeah.
Because culture is it can be unrecognizable from within, a 10-year period. And, people always say, well, do things get better over time? They don't always. Don't always. Like, 27% of people 18 to 29 have a like pretty favorable opinion of QAnon.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think is going to happen when like the generation that's born now, they're the majority voting bloc in America? The generation that, millennials are weepy and annoying because they were promised a future that they never got. What happens when there's the first American generation that was never promised a future and never got one? What fucking weird shit are they going to believe?
I think they all get face tattoos.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something to believe in.
Right. So I want to quickly talk about the anti-war movement. During 2003, on the eve of the Iraq War, we saw this huge anti-war demonstrations basically across the globe. Now, that said, the anti-war movement like unequivocally failed. And I don't say that as like a moral judgment on any of the people who were involved, or even really as a strategic judgment. I mean, what could anybody have done at the time except protest and kind of try to repeat the success of protesting the Vietnam War, right? But the fact remains that, if we still have troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. Guantanamo Bay is still open. The Department of Homeland Security is like still full throttle. So by those metrics, the anti-war movement like absolutely failed. And I guess I'm curious what you guys think. Like, do you think this was a death knell for the anti-war movement in the US, or some kind of turning point?
I yes and no. I mean, like, I think it did. It was sort of like, I mean, the Vietnam protest movement kind of failed too. And I think that's the real third rail in American politics, is being against the empire, is either whether it's isolationism or some sort of like pacifist internationalism. It is the thing that no one wants to do, because it's, it's the only thing we actually export anymore. I don't know what they could have done. They mobilized a lot of people. I mean, the fucking Pope came out against it. I think they were going to do it no matter what. I mean, I think it was the death knell for it in mass politics from the left for a little bit, because it was, so many people were mobilized, like entire cities worth of people, and just nothing.
Right.
And I mean, you know, you can but you can also look at the UK, where they have a more institutional left and a more active left. They also mobilized a lot, and they don't even, with our country, you can look at our electoral system and be like, why would the representative from Wisconsin give a shit about people protesting in New York? But in the UK, it's, they don't have that excuse. And this was just, the West was going to do this no matter what. I do think it caused a lot of people to give up on the idea of being anti-war.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was the most active sort of anti-war media presence I saw before Trump. Not as far as organizing, but as far as like getting airtime, was Republican opposition to further intervention in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It just like, I think, consciously people at CNN and people at MSNBC don't really want to air left anti-war opinions. But I also think the spirit was beaten out of people a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I personally haven't been to an anti-war protest since, the early 2000s, even though there have been multiple occasions. So
I also think there was this kind of gap that Trump absolutely exploited. There was a lot of negative sentiment towards these kinds of interventions. And there was a lot of like on the ground suffering when people came back, mm-hmm. especially in communities where they are heavily recruiting from. Mm-hmm. And nobody really said much to those people. I mean, you saw Sarah Palin give nods to them, or McCain be like, they're patriots, right? But, the VA is getting underfunded. People are having trouble getting basic access. There's denial that they even have any kind of like ongoing mental issues from having engaged there. And yeah, I think he kind of like latched onto that and framed his isolationism. If he had just said, I don't like the wars and I'm stopping them, and he didn't say, I also don't like NATO and I'm bringing industry back to America, it would be a very different type of isolationism. But he like latched onto something that I think hit a populist nerve in a nationalist way, and it resonated with people because the suffering of the, rank and file military was going unaddressed. But I also think like we saw the Bush administration just push through this unbelievable amount of executive power. Mm-hmm. And when we think about the repression of the protests that's now becoming contested even more after the attempted coup, I'm just air quoting that because I don't want people in the comments to be like, it wasn't a coup. Like, I'm not here to argue semantics. In any case.
Another episode.
Yeah. I think, people are talking about, there's such a difference between the way that you're cracking down. But really, we saw that during the Bush administration. I think they resurrected like a law that was written in World War I against mm-hmm. dissent to the war. They expanded executive overreach unbelievably to the extent that Obama could bomb countries with absolutely no approval from the House or the Senate. I was wondering if we could go into that. Like, there is a kind of branch of this anti-war movement's legacy. Part of why it failed, I think, is because there was such a robust state response. And we saw that again with the Black Lives Matter protests, like tanks in the streets, riot gear.
So before I forget, do you either of you guys think that you're on some kind of Patriot Act list? Felix, you might be too young, but I really feel like right after 9/11, the bar was so lowered that like if you like bought a Chumbawamba CD online or something, like suddenly like the government was allowed to like go through all your mail,
My brother might be on one because his name is Raheem.
Oh, he's definitely on one.
That.
Well, remember Cat Stevens was put on a no-fly list because his name was Yusuf Islam at the time.
There was that case of a sheriff's department infiltrating like this sweet group of like anti-war boomers.
Oh yeah.
Like tons of stuff like that. Just psychotic shit. I mean, I probably was too young unless they like put everyone who played CS 1.6 on a list, which they might have.
They could have, yeah.
I mean, they could have. They did dumber things during the time, but I think probably. I don't know. I've always gotten patted down at the airport, but I think that's just me misunderstanding social cues more than anything.
Is it an actual security official patting you down, or just a random citizen? Because
just a guy.
Okay.
But always the same guy.
It's the same guy. It's been the same guy since 2010. It's really fucking weird.
See, the feds never tell you though, so it still could be them.
And it's probably an undercover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we live with so much of this. It's totally normalized. It's actually surprising in the conversation about the security at the Capitol. People are like, why isn't this like when I go to the airport?
Yeah. No, yeah, that is another thing. I mean, the Bush family, no one has ever made out like them. They got everything they ever wanted. And yeah, what you just said, why isn't this like when I go to the airport? Why is it like that when you go to the airport?
Yeah.
That's the thing. It set this new standard, not just for like personal tolerance for security theater and all this shit, but also like the level of respect and adoration that like your average Democrat has for someone in the CIA now is insane, and that is a direct consequence of the war on terror. I mean, it is, in some ways the people that were sort of fretting about Fox News at the time were very right, because the fact that they made that into a culture war issue, that was the greatest thing that could ever have happened to the CIA or the national security state. You're telling me like this agency that everyone distrusts, this thing that everyone hates, like look at the films made in the 70s. Look how, reporters who people found out worked with the CIA, look how they were treated in the 70s. Go through Iran-Contra, go through all this. Americans broadly distrust the idea of like jackbooted thugs killing children at Ruby Ridge. And then you can do this thing where it's like, oh yeah, you're an annoying pussy who drinks like a gay type of coffee if you don't like this. Right. And it caused Democrats to go like, no, like Democrats who already supported this, who already, increased the funding of the national security state every year, to go, no, I actually love this. I love this. I love this. But I love it in a pluralistic, nice way, and you love it in a bad way. And it moved everyone so far to the right now that it's, I mean, unfortunately, those over a quarter of 18 to 29-year-olds who support QAnon, they may be the most mainstream, like anti-NatSec state, anti-CIA force, and it's only because
they're the only people who hate the deep state.
Yeah, but it's only because
especially after this last week.
Right.
There's heaps of praise. James Comey's back in the mix. They had, I think, like 6 or 7 former CIA operators being like commenting about the coup, I think on MSNBC.
Is James Comey really back in the mix? I missed him. Yeah,
he was on my phone earlier on CNN.
Great.
When I was doing sound check with Kale, and I was like, "Why is James Comey blaming my ears?"
By the way, when I say I missed him, it's not that I wanted him to return.
Yeah,
it's just I didn't see that he had.
All of these figures have kind of been rehabilitated. I mean, it's not just Bush, and I think you're exactly right about the kind of you now have the FBI being like, give us tips to identify these people, like. Who knows what they'll do with those. I don't think it's necessarily the fault of the people giving the tips, right? It's the way the states positioned this like massive expansion of executive power that also happened under Obama and also happened under Trump. And now that people are worried about what Trump does with it, they're like, we need another source of power to beat that back.
Yeah, so let's talk about that like process of rehabilitation a little bit, because Felix, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because, you know, there is basically a collective national amnesia on so many levels about the Bush years. And I know that you've talked about this or like commented on this before. And for me, it kind of takes two forms. So one is this rehabilitation that you mentioned, Ariella, where suddenly liberals love Bush because he, you know, stood up against Trump. Like he was the last decent Republican president. And he's the bulwark against populism, apparently. But you know, he's so decent. He like paints pictures of animals. He, you know, like sends Christmas cards, so on and so forth. So there's that. Yes, here's one that he sent this year, which apparently was some sort of like massive own of Trump. According to the liberal commentariat. I don't know. This is one of his paintings. It's nice. I don't know. So there's that angle. But then I think the amnesia also manifests in something that we sort of talked about earlier, which is that all of this rhetoric, all of these complaints that were sort of leveled against Bush during his term are actually really similar to what we hear being said about Trump during his term, right? So like, yes, he was the worst president of all time. Like this is a huge desecration of the Constitution. He's so dumb. He can't speak. This is like, things have really gone too far this time, you know? And that, as we know, didn't work to oust Bush from office. So I'm just curious, like, why did people think it was going to work this time? I mean, like, surely some people must have been alive during the Bush administration. Like, not everybody is under 30, right?
Wrong.
Right. Hate to break it to you.
I mean, the weird thing to me is that it did work. I mean, I guess it's a victory for liberal accelerationists. That you can, if you have a president, if you have someone do such a shitty job that you can elect somebody as bad as Joe Biden. I guess that's like the contradictions will be so bold that we'll have to elect a guy who gives the shittiest speech ever every time he speaks. But
you guys remember during the Bush years, there was all of this rhetoric that some like sane Republican, some moderate Republican would stand up to all of his bullshit. And the person that Democrats identified was Colin Powell, of all people. Kale, I think we have a picture of Colin Powell holding up a fake vial of anthrax at the UN when he's trying to convince the UN that the US needs to go to war immediately. I mean, this is the guy who was supposed to put an end to like Bush's reign of terror. I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, no, I mean, a guy who should
He's not a Republican anymore, by the way.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
I am reminded of one of the like best / worst Fox News headlines. It was from 2008. Colin Powell was on stage at like a Black Eyed Peas concert or some shit, like whatever like rap concert Colin Powell would go to.
Where is the love?
Yeah. And the headline on the Fox News website was Powell at rap concert spurs rumors that he may endorse Obama, which is like one of the fucking like dear Lord, 2008 was a very different time, but
But Ariella, like you said, like Colin Powell's back in the news again because he says he's no longer Republican, you know? Like so I guess Felix, to your point, like maybe it did work after all.
Well, he'll endorse Obama now.
Yeah. I mean, he did vote for Obama, if I recall right, but he I mean, it did work just because, I mean, people's lives were so dramatically shittier now, I think. I mean, like Biden won by a very big raw vote total, but not really the margin that Obama won by in 2008, which was also a case of a Democrat winning because, you know, people's lives have gotten so fucking awful. But
detailed in our earlier segments, if anyone's just joining us.
I really think though, if you know, COVID doesn't happen, I think probably Trump wins. But yeah, no, that it is surprising to me that they brought out a lot of the same Bush playbook, the begging for sane Republicans and, you know, things like that. I mean, there were more sane Republicans during Bush, but they all got wiped out in 2008. Those are always the first to go.
Mhm.
Those are always the sane ones of every party are always the first to get fucking wiped out in a wave year. They're the weakest links.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
there was like, you know, some Chris something. I even history forgets his name too, but he was one of the last Republicans of the Northeast, and he, you know, he did everything that Democrats wanted as far as like coming out against the war, being sensible on tax cuts and all this shit. And it's like, yeah, he got fucking wiped out.
Mhm.
Like people either want a Democrat or a Republican, not some, you can't please everybody except for, I mean, Joe Lieberman. You know, he's the
Forgot
only
about
one.
him too.
Yeah, he's the only one. I guess it's just his firecracker charisma.
Right. Yeah.
Droopy dog
Yeah.
charisma. All right. Who do you think will be the next U.S. villain to get redeemed? They seem to be lining up, taking advantage of this Bush moment.
Yeah. They're all
I
rushing.
mean,
to
sorry,
line
Trump
now.
moment, Freudian
Yeah.
slip. Yeah.
It's hard to do worse than John Brennan, isn't it? I mean, just as far as like complete pieces of shit that should be in prison, you know, things I can't say for, you know, the purposes, I don't want to get sued. I won't accuse him of, but of the things he's admitted to, just awful, should be in fucking prison. That is somebody who, like, yeah, obviously seeing David Frum's face makes me sick. Seeing all these people up there makes me sick. But John Brennan especially, just, I mean, it's hard to think of anyone worse than him. I don't know. Doug Fife would be a weird one to me, I think. If Doug Fife was like, I mean, he probably voted for Trump. All these guys did. Like John Yoo was giving Trump legal advice on how to overturn the election. But I guess if there was some like Team B mollusk, like Wolfowitz or Fife, that was brought out and like praised, it would surprise me a little bit, because at least with John Brennan, you know, the liberals who are now hypnotized by the NatSec cult can go, he protected our country and he's, you know, fucking against Trump. But you know, for someone like Doug Fife, who's just you know, done nothing but write policy papers on how to turn the war into a culture war issue, that would surprise me a little bit. And because he's such a, you know, he's such a background player. He's a character actor.
Yeah,
in the
one of the
Grant
bit
show.
players. Yeah. If this were a Sorkin show, he'd be a guest character, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Ariella, who do you think is going to be rehabilitated? Because I think that like the majority of people, you know, from the Bush years, like the Republicans and the people in his cabinet, are probably just going to slink away quietly, right? Like David Frum has writing gigs, but like I'm thinking about somebody like John Ashcroft, who like was in a Senate barbershop quartet and like I think now runs a think tank, or I don't even think it's a think tank. I think it's like a family foundation. But anyway, like again, he was the architect of the Patriot Act and should like probably be tried at The Hague for his role in the Iraq War. And he's just like living a life now, you know? But I don't know. Like, do you think other people are going to be elevated?
Well, I think that you have to, if you're going to turn the wheels of the PR machine, then you have to have something at stake. And like, you know, John Ashcroft doesn't probably want to get back in the game in any like explicit or visible way. I'm sure he's happy, you know, doing whatever it is he's doing behind the scenes now. So I think Bush's like redemption is part because, you know, politicians are always in the public eye. I mean, presidents are always in the public eye. There's not really a space for him to leave. And so I think he's doing this, one, for his own legacy, but I think too as part of a concerted Republican realignment that he ushered in the de-alignment of, if that makes sense, right? You saw the Tea Party emerge after him. You saw right-wing violence emerge. You saw standoffs where, you know, like the Bundys taking federal land for their cattle. Obviously, there are like some real economic and political issues that underpin people's participation and things like that. But I think that was really a kind of preview of the way that Republicans engaged with their constituents, and a lot of them made concessions to it. And you saw Tea Party candidates ousting well-established Republicans, and he like laid low through that, probably to see which way the wind went. And then when it seemed like there was enough of a push against Trump and a need for this, good old-fashioned Republican resurgence, he came back in the game. Cheney did to a certain extent. Colin Powell now is like these calls for unity. We have to have civility, et cetera, when I don't think Bush had any civility whatsoever for the Black population of New Orleans or for Muslim people who were being targeted by domestic terrorists.
Right.
So,
I mean, on that point, so I remember, during Trump's term, when he sort of enacted the Muslim travel ban, I remember a lot of people were actually contrasting him with Bush and being like, hey, after 9/11, like Bush was actually like really civil and talked about how we shouldn't turn on Arab and Muslim Americans. And it's like, okay, like I guess he did say that, but then he also like began a regime of racial profiling and like detaining them without due process. So it's hard to say.
And it's the same with Trump, though. You could say, oh, Trump's a racist, and then you could roll a clip of him bailing out a Black grandma and getting her out of jail for like, a petty crime or helping out a Black small business owner. These things are super dangerous. The way that the culture war draws its lines is always apolitical. I think like Bush's legacy shows us that it's just it's kind of like the spoonful of sugar to make the medicine go down of whatever the political push is.
Well, that is, I mean, it's why the specific line of argument that, ex-Republican president or ex-president is a specific evil is such a bad road to go down, because one thing you can always depend on, there's always going to be a worse guy. And that guy that you said was the most evil in the world, like, suddenly you're I mean, holy shit. Like if I just sort of vaguely paid attention to politics from like 06 to 08 and then came back, like, no wonder so many people don't participate in the political process.
Yeah.
This guy was the most evil fucking person in the world, total aberration even in his party. And now you're praising him as an example of a good leader. And it's like, I don't care how bad someone is unless it just doesn't work politically, because there's always going to be a shittier guy. And then that guy that you said, 10 years ago was the worst, the cancer in his own party, just, cut off the head, the body will die, everything will be normal after him. Suddenly you're holding him up as a standard. And, his vision of international politics won.
Yeah.
When I hear Joe Biden like talk about like restoring American leadership and these, it just, there's no, those debates were so insane because it was like just two people listing their crackpot ideas for potential nuclear conflicts for what border clashes they think are good ideas.
Yeah.
Kale, can we run a clip actually on that note? Because I think it's really important for the left to not there's a lot to make fun of about the personality traits and behaviors of politicians, right? And that's really fun to do, but that's not political, and it's good for us to narrow in on what is wrong with these policies. It wasn't that George Bush was bad because he was stupid and he said nuclear and he cleared brush, or he was a reformed cocaine addict. Yeah. Or read books upside down. It was that his policies ruined the lives of hundreds of millions of people, destabilized the global economy, destabilized the entire Middle East, literally killed millions of people there. That's where our focus should be. And I think one of the things that we saw come out of the liberal anti-Bush media establishment was this he's dumb. They gestured towards what was wrong with his policies, but there was no counter argument. Although you do see that from Bernie, like he's holding it down every single time, being like the top 1%. He does say, here is what we should do. In fact, in the clip that I had about No Child Left Behind, she goes on to say, if you want to improve schooling, you need to end poverty in America. Mm-hmm. Those are the ways that we have to focus rather than kind of indulging in the like personality war. But I want to run this clip because I think it shows the way that Bush exploited this to rehabilitate himself by positioning his civility and bipartisanship that he now has as a kind of stand-in for an economic vision against isolationism. And he kind of equates Bernie and Trump in this clip, so I wanted to run it.
An outright fabrication. There are some signs that the intensity of support for democracy itself has waned, especially among the young, who never experienced the galvanizing moral clarity of the Cold War, or never focused on the ruin of entire nations by socialist central planning. Some have called this democratic deconsolidation. Really, it seems to be a combination of weariness, frayed tempers, and forgetfulness.
Yeah, forgetfulness is really bad. I don't know, has anybody forgotten anything about him? Like he was a war criminal or
all the liberals, apparently.
That clip is interesting because, I mean, well, first of all, that's the real Bush.
Yeah.
That's him talking
he can talk.
Yeah, talking to a room full of neoconservative Draculas. But it did make me think, this is the other reason why personality-based attacks don't work. A politician, their outward personality that's what they want you to see, a successful one at least. And it's like, yeah, Bush wants you to call him like a dumb hick because that clip, that's what he is.
Yeah.
What he actually is, he wants you to think he's, like plays in a country bear jamboree band with like bears that wear overalls. But in actuality, yeah, he's deep state royalty. His dad killed JFK. He's completely like bloodless piece of shit. Same with Trump. Like Trump wants you to call him like rude and insane and dangerous.
Yeah.
Like
and people take the bait every time.
Yep. And it's the same way that the kind of broader culture war where they're roping in these issues about, families are degrading. We need to encourage marriage, home ownership, get back to these conservative values, or, the kind of democratic model, which has switched into a sort of like slightly less defanged boutique multiculturalism. These are cover stories for policies that when you look at them continuously are pretty similar. There's not a lot of departure here. They may say like Obama did that it's in the name of bipartisanship and that was a big part of his platform and he had to do it. But really all of this, just like the veneer of personality is the scapegoat for the politician and the political actor and their team of strategists, because they're really not like a single person. They're like a festering multiplicity of parasitic bodies. Those people have, the politician veneer, and then the party has the cultural veneer. We're the party of, the guy driving the truck, et cetera, et cetera. And they both fail every time. And insofar as the veneer appeals to normal people, you do see like record numbers of disengagement with the political process every single time because nothing's really changing and people don't like feeling tricked. They're desperate and they need some real reforms.
Ariella, right after your segment, when you mentioned the housing crash, I also wanted to mention that Bill Clinton, again, was the one who got the ball rolling on financial deregulation. Yeah. So yes, the housing crash, that was like a Bush era product, but again, it was just part of a continuum that was begun.
From Reagan.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, like I'm not trying to say that there's just no difference whatsoever between Democrats and Republicans, although I know some people do argue that, and there's a lot of evidence in their favor. I mean, Bush did do things like like he, rammed through the partial birth abortion ban, which, is this kind of draconian measure curtailing reproductive rights. And I don't think that a Democrat would have done that. So there are things here and there, and, they're not always insignificant, right?
Mhm.
But on certain planks, especially on economics, you do see this continuing, line. And like you said, like that, I think gets kind of eclipsed. So.
I mean, Carter started the ball rolling on a lot of deregulation.
True.
He deregulated a lot of key industries. He, like, not so famously deregulated the credit industry in a massive way. No, yeah, this is, I've heard it argued. I don't know if you could say this all the way because it's not true of everything, but that it's just sort of been on a downward slide since 1968. And not really improved. And I think with, there's some things that have gotten better, but I just think as far as like what the floor is for economic policy, that is true. And for what the floor is for imperial policy, that is true.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at least since 68, if not, a little before, economic inequality has been just on a constant like upward trajectory. Wages, and that's kind of also the point at which wages become uncoupled from productivity. And, you see people working longer and harder, but their wages stagnant. So yeah, there are a lot of ways in which things have only gotten worse, I think.
Like Bob Dylan.
Right.
Just kidding. Can't say that, sorry.
I won't even say my opinions on him then, if that's too inflammatory.
He's fine. He's fine. No more personal attacks, right, guys?
Right. Okay, so we're at we're basically coming up on an hour, so I think we should kind of wind things down. But I think what I want to end on is asking you guys, who was worse, Bush or Trump? Because that's kind of the question of the hour, right?
This is I would normally I would throw to Ariella first, but this is a loaded, could be a loaded question. So I'll do the courtesy of taking it first. There are probably 10 to 20 things that people are mad at me for already. So,
just take another.
I would have to say that Bush is worse, just on the virtue of the fact that I do not think that we have a Trump without a Bush.
Yeah.
I think it's, chicken and egg thing. And I don't know. I just, as bad as Trump is, as awful as his economic policies have been, he's greatly increased the amount of civilians killed in drone attacks, which was already calamitously high. Even his handling of COVID, I mean, I just don't see that as being quite as bad for the world as Iraq was. I mean, with COVID, he absolutely fucked it up. There's no question. But I think that no American president, save for if we got like a Tito or somebody, would have scored under 150,000 dead. As he's awful, obviously, and did the worst job he could have done. But this country was so perfectly positioned to get fucking railed by COVID and lose just hundreds of thousands of people. Just in the actual act of administration, he's terrible at it. He's pretty much bad at everything. But, the small things he did, like going to North Korea and like shaking hands with Kim Jong-il, like I can't think of anything similar with Bush where I can go, oh, that was, I guess one thing, and Bush did spend a comparatively high amount of money on fighting AIDS in Africa.
Although tied to abstinence only sex ed.
Yeah.
So
he did. And he actually kind of improved some immigration prospects for refugees coming from certain countries that could claim that they were being religiously persecuted. A lot of his
right, Christians, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His international policy was like largely directed at these religious kind of issues or religious foundations.
I guess like any president, you're just going to find mostly bad, and then like one or two personal projects that were like okay or good. But I think Bush is creating, like, you can, as much as Trump fucks up, as much as he purposely, harms people or just, doesn't know how to do something or doesn't give a shit, it doesn't happen without Bush. So I'm always going to have to say Bush.
Yeah, I think, Bush is a better painter. We can say that.
Yeah.
Definitively.
Well, I mean, have we really seen Trump's art yet? I mean, it might be too soon to say.
That would be amazing if he was like actually great at it. It's like an amazing. It's like, yeah, just no one believed him because it's like, oh, what? Yeah, like you said, you were the best baseball player in New York. Yeah, okay. And it's like, no, he's actually like really good.
Incredibly talented with form, space. Yeah.
Just for some reason, he's amazing.
Look out for it next year.
Yeah, we'll keep our eyes on that redemption arc for him. And who knows what Melania's will be.
I'm excited. I mean, she's already done some amazing pieces. I loved her Christmas designs.
Yeah.
Here, getting back to, the serious, the gravity of the holiday.
Right? Yeah.
Chrome tree.
It was a very Eastern European interpretation of Christmas.
Yeah. And we have to be tolerant of all cultures and all forms of cultural expression. So the liberals really shouldn't have jumped on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jen, I'm sorry I copped out there with answering that question.
Yeah,
but
no, it's hard, right? Like, I mean, Felix, I think what you said, I'm inclined to agree. Like,
yeah, I do think
just on the point that there is no Trump without Bush. I mean, that's totally true. I think that's a really good point. And just going back to some of the themes we were discussing earlier, like Bush and Trump. Okay, so like, for example, Trump is, people always talk about Trump as having kind of emboldened like a new wave of white supremacy or like white nationalists. And I think that is true to a certain extent. But when you go back to Bush, even though he didn't like verbally or rhetorically court white supremacists, when he sort of launched the war in Afghanistan, one of the things that he did was lower the requirements to entering the military because he didn't want to do a draft and no one was really signing up. So what he did was he basically was like, well, we'll start letting in people who we didn't really want to let in before. So that included neo-Nazis, like people with Nazi tattoos, people with, mental illnesses, I guess like people who were, physically unfit, although that, in retrospect, was like a much less serious problem. But he basically created a cohort of white nationalists who had military training. And I don't know if you guys remember in like 2011 or like 2012, one of them shot up a Sikh temple in Wisconsin. So yep. I mean, because of the belief
founded by him that there were right. terrorist cells in the United States,
right.
that regular civilians had to be vigilant constantly.
Right.
I mean, do you remember in New York all the "See Something, Say Something" posters?
Yeah.
Like that is not that's not responsible for empowering regular Americans to think that it's their job to arm themselves and protect the streets.
Right. There was a constant environment of fear and suspicion and hatred of Muslims. No matter how many times he appeared in a mosque or no matter what he said, it doesn't change what he's doing.
Yeah.
That.
And a big group of people were like, he has to do that. But what he really wants is us to arm ourselves, us to protect our country. Like, that kind of rhetoric. And, that's also not new for Bush. Mm-hmm. I think any kind of warmongering administration has to drum up that sort of popular fervor and kind of like rapacious desire and fear. But what he did that was new was armed the police encouraged people. I remember like seeing news pieces on people training to like join into the army. Like, we have to be ready, which was just like regular, I guess you'd call them militia groups. But like, you know, civilian groups who were like, we're going to prevent another attack. All of that was tolerated and encouraged.
Right. When you tell people it's a good thing to drop everything and join the Marines because you want to kill Muslims, that's fundamentally a good thing. You know, what is that but emboldening white supremacy? And you know what? Like, I'm sorry, but what is emboldening white supremacists or a cohort of white supremacists or violent extremist elements than the greatest one-time growth of the national security state, which he is responsible for?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so it's settled.
You know, we're not outside of that legacy now. Trump didn't invent those things, and it's interesting to me that so many Trump supporters actually became disillusioned with Bush, and then, you know, participated in the riots at the Capitol, and one of those people was the woman that was shot and killed there. And you can see a direct line between our interventions in Iraq, the rhetoric around them, the, you know, media on both sides showing us bombing Baghdad, the constant paranoia, like trust no one, report everything, call in on your neighbors, foreigners are bad.
Like, what do people think imparted a greater hatred of Muslims and a greater lack of accounting for their lives as being worth anything? Is it, you know, the awful things that Trump says and does a lot of the time, or is it killing 1 million Iraqis and then it's just fine, nothing happens? No, and you can't even be mad at him.
He was capitalizing on the anti-Muslim sentiment that Bush fomented.
Yes.
He wasn't just saying, here's another cool group of people to hate out of nowhere. He was looking at the base that he courted and looking at the beliefs that they already held. And they held those beliefs because of the rhetoric coming out of the Bush administration.
And Bush was friends with the people who actually did 9/11.
Right. Last question. Did Bush do 9/11? I'm just kidding. That was kind of like a watershed moment when I feel like the fringe left and the fringe right kind of came together to say that Bush did 9/11. Like, there are a few conspiracy theories that both sides of the political spectrum agree on. That's one of them. The government putting fluoride in the water to brainwash all of us is another one. I feel like anti-vax is kind of another one.
Yeah, I spiritually agree with Bush did 9/11, even if I don't think it's literally. I don't know. There's a lot we don't know on it. I will say that. I'm not going to say it's thermite paint or any of that shit, but it is like, well, you know, if they knew it was coming, let it happen. Would that surprise you?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the first time that something like that has happened. But I mean, again, we won't know for another 50 years for sure.
You can trust Dick Cheney. He shot his friend in
right.
And made him
Miss
apologize.
Cheney, now part of the resistance also. So very reputable.
Yeah.
If there's ever been a greater argument for generational imprisonment than that family.
If you can't get like the estate tax to be illegal, maybe we should try for generational imprisonment.
Yeah, I mean, okay. On that note, thank you very much, Felix, for being here. Talking about the Bush years, always a pleasure. And so
thank you. It was a great discussion. I feel like we have 1 million episodes we can do on this. Maybe we'll have you back for another one, but probably not about Bush.
No, whatever you guys want. I thank you guys for having me so much. I had a great time. Any
continued.
Any if you want to talk about talking points memo from the years 2005 to 7, I could also talk about that.
Next show. That will redeem you actually in the public eye. As our commenters turned on you and you've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no. I gotta dig myself out of the hole here.
Get out that paint set.
I've hired David Axelrod.
You're good then. Nothing to worry about. Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you guys, and talk to everyone soon, hopefully.
Good night,
Bye.
Felix.